Welcome, Terry. I'm so delighted to see you again. I think we did a talk about it a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago when I first started the podcast. And I've just been so enamored with your work and your devotion and focus on helping us all to talk more openly and honestly about climate change and what it means to us and the whole concept of what collapse can mean. And you've written this absolutely amazing book called The Eye of the Storm, and it's called Facing Climate and Social Chaos with Calm and Courage. And I would say, before we even get into this conversation, it's a fabulous book. I've been through it thoroughly, and it really has helped me to have a more contained understanding of my own level of fear and chaos, which is facing all of us in the collective. So, Terry, just tell me a little bit about, first of all, let's start off with, why did you write the book?
Well, thanks for that kind introduction. And I can tell I should have gotten my throat lozenges. I may make a dive for those in a minute. So I have been hosting events in the Deep Adaptation Forum, which you know, for I think it's 3 years now. And it helps me work through my own issues about adapting to our current state, and it helps me have a picture of how that is for various people, how the process of what we call inner adaptation. I mean, it's not the same for everyone, but there are kind of some milestones and some questions and dilemmas that recur almost predictably. And so with my experience, I know not everybody has access to the internet. I know that not everybody can take a Zoom call in the middle of the day, which is when I offer them. And so I wanted the things I've learned to be available to as many people as possible about how we deal with, things that are terrifying and life-changing. And there's a thing about, like, your old worldview just doesn't work anymore. And that that's something that I just don't see addressed very often in other books and blogs about dealing with climate change and dealing with social chaos, because they're obviously intertwined.
Well, we're seeing it worldwide, aren't I? The whole concept of, I mean, I think at the moment there's 22 wars going on around the world. There's a huge amount of conflict that we're not even being aware of, actually. And also, just recently, I think it was yesterday, we had that huge earthquake in Japan. And we've had volcanoes going off in Iceland. And it just feels like the world isn't the safe place that we took for granted a few years ago.
And we may be a particularly privileged group of people to ever have been able to make that assumption. So that's one part of the inner adaptations, to recognize that the world has never actually been a safe place for most people in most times, and they coped. The other thing, though, is especially in the US, and I think to some extent in England as well, in the developed world, there's been this idea that things will just keep getting more, and things will just keep getting bigger and better, and the idea of decline or sudden catastrophe and not being able to rebuild. So disasters have always happened, but because of resource depletion, we will not be able to rebuild in the future the way we have in the past. And because of climate change, of course, disasters are more frequent. But don't blame climate change for the earthquakes and some of the time. There have always been nasty
Yes, there's
typhus.
always been,
Yeah.
it's never been thus, but I understand that the planet itself is certainly going through its own form of metamorphosis, and maybe we'll be seeing more of that. I mean, we just have to wait and see what happens. But I'm curious, Terry, tell me about why you got into this work, a little bit about your background.
Thank you. I am a Christian minister who started my career as a chemist, research scientist. And so I've always kind of liked putting the pieces together and sort of going to the root of things. So I did some theory as a chemist, and I loved theology. How do we picture the sacred? How do we picture our relationship to the sacred? Those things are very important to me. I also found when I was serving as a transitional minister, a couple of things. One was that I really appreciated working with dying people, both in the home as a pastor and in hospice situations, in a formal hospice situation, because things matter. And because it was really helpful for people to see me saying, this is normal, this is what happens, don't be scared. Here are some of the signposts. It's super helpful, as you well know.
Yeah, I think
And in addition,
it's
yeah,
normalizing, isn't it? It's actually normalizing something that people don't know what is normal.
right. And being what I call the non-anxious presence, and that's actually a technical term in family systems theory and psychology that ministers love, because we deal with a system of, you know, brokenhearted and enthusiastic and people all over the map, and somebody needs to be in the center, hopefully more than one somebody, the calm center. And that's where the metaphor eye of the storm comes from, the name of the book. Being that non-anxious presence when something's happening that we don't understand, like a pastoral transition, a crisis in the church, or an impending death.
Yeah. And I guess your work with death and dying has really enabled you to do the work you do with deep adaptation. And for those that don't know about deep adaptation, Terry, do you just want to explain a little bit more about it?
Sure. In 2018, Jim Bendel he couldn't get a regular scholarly journal to publish it, a paper called Deep Adaptation, in which he, as a sustainability professional, said, what we're doing is not sustainable, and I've been going through a whole emotional process about that. And in order to actually recognize this, you'll probably have to go through an emotional process too. And so I went through an emotional process, and because I saw the signs, and I couldn't admit it to myself until I read that paper. That's background. He also started this organization, Deep Adaptation Forum, in which he envisioned professionals networking around the world, helping people to adapt deeply. That is to go beyond these little band-aid fixes that we have to reduce harm. And the purpose of the Deep Adaptation Forum is, let me see if I can call it to my mind now, embodying and enabling loving responses to our predicament. The predicament, of course, is collapse in one form or another. We're not dogmatic. We don't say what that looks like. We let people figure that out themselves.
I was
So just to be clear, he has left the forum, and the forum has turned more into a haven for everyday activists and caring people. And sometimes professionals find each other, but that's what it's turned into.
Yeah,
and
it's a wonderful forum to support the supporters.
Right. And a place where it's not in the same way that, say, a death cafe is a place where it's not taboo to talk about death. The Deep Adaptation Forum is a place where it's not taboo to talk about collapse, which
Yeah.
is huge for a lot of people.
I had a I was part of the very early on part of the Deep Adaptation Forum running the death cafes. This is
Mhm.
this is just when it started. And I'll never forget one of we didn't call it a death cafe. Well, we kind of did, but it just enabled the space for people to come and talk about their fear of the unknown and what they could
Mhm.
be imagining. This is before COVID, so it must be 2018, I mean. And I never forget a chap just sitting talking about the fear that he had that he was not going to be able to protect his family if things do kick off. And I remember him crying and with such strong emotion and thinking, my God, he's representing so many people's that fear of how do I protect my family, my children, if things do kick off. And it was a very powerful reminder to me about how we need community now, how we need to come together and really support each other through this chaos that is being presented to us in the world. And I just wondered what you had to say about that.
Community, yeah, it's something that our industrial consumer society has undermined really effectively, right? Everybody's looking at their phone. Um, every a lot of relationships are transactional. Um, it's very convenient to pay for a service and not acknowledge that a human being is delivering it.
Yeah.
Um, so we're all learning, and it's a priority. And there's quite a bit in the book in various places about community. And I'm suggesting that there's two kinds that we need to develop. And one is, I think, the kind we usually think of, kindred souls, people who understand us, who we can open our heart to. And in my case, it seems like activists and people who give service love to hang out together and inspire each other. So that's one kind of community, but the other kind is just the people in your sphere who, when things break down, they're going to be the ones that you're looking to, and vice versa. You know, it's the community you're in, not the community you choose.
It's forming your own community of people that you feel comfortable with, isn't it? That you can talk to on the same level.
Well, two things there. That community with the same level, and then the people who maybe you don't have as much in common with, except geography and connections of mutual dependence.
Mm.
And oh, who was I reading the other day? Th- Those people do not have to think the same way you do, but you can still take care of each other in really major ways.
Yes, it's more like the old-fashioned way of community where people actually did
Yes.
just showed up to be supportive to each other. And everybody might have known each other's business. That's the negative side of it. But the positive
Yeah,
side is I walk out the front door and we all know each other and we all go, oh, are you okay? And I think
right.
that's what needs to
Right.
come back. There's a big movement in England. I don't know if it's the same in the States of creating gardens or allotments together where you're feeding a particular group of people. It might be several families coming together. And I just wondered, was that happening in the States as well? It's a big movement in the UK.
It exists here. It's not nearly as widespread, I think.
Okay. I just think that's another way of coming together. Food,
Mhm,
this sort of
mhm.
connection of it's this support, isn't it? We need emotional, physical, and most of all, spiritual support. I think a lot of people are beginning to question or look for a more spiritual connection with whatever they consider the divine to be, but also on a deeper level with each other, finding a meaning to conversations or a depth of conversations where you meet each other in your heart.
Okay, you've just jumped around a little here. So gardening is something that when I interviewed people, there are a number of summaries of interviews in the book. When I interviewed people, many times I heard about how much gardening fed their souls, not
Yeah.
just their bodies. And there's a couple of things going on there. There's agency for being able to eat what you've nurtured yourself. That whole process um, helps you feel less powerless. There's also some kind of connection to the earth. So you know that in the Deep Adaptation Forum, Emma Mary Gathergood hosts an event weekly called Deep Listening. Oh, sorry, Earth Listening. And gardening feeds into that, the idea that we get nurture, wisdom, strength from the non-human world, from spending time and getting to know the non-human world. And then, oh, right, we wake up and say, if we had been doing this all along, we wouldn't be in this mess. Not that we all need to go start our homestead or something. That's not workable. But there's an emotional, spiritual healing that happens for a lot of people when they get their hands dirty and grow things.
Yeah, I feel like the earth is calling us. It's calling us back. It feels like it's just going, please remember me. And I think that's for a lot, certainly for a lot of people that I work with in the groups that I'm associated with at home, there's a lot of that going on, this desire to connect deeply with the land. And when feeling out of sorts or fearful is about working with the land, walking in the land, asking the land for a sort of sense of reconnection and a sense of cleansing and ritual. I think a lot of people are turning back to ritual. On New Year's Eve, which is a couple of days ago, we did a big fire ritual in the land where we burnt what we didn't want anymore, and then we welcomed in what we did. And the fire, the elemental of fire was such an important part of the ceremony, and it was pouring with rain. So we all just danced in the rain. And it's that kind of thing, like it's just welcoming the elements as they present themselves.
Yeah, I think industrial consumer society has really impoverished our lives, that, ritual doesn't make money. It's not, it doesn't make sense, it's beyond our left brain analysis. Yeah. So one of the things that often happens on people's journey is kind of this back and forth between, well, in industrial consumer society, that makes no sense. That has no value. But I'm going to try this other thing because there are values that we've just closed off. And people start out wanting to fix things and control things. And more I discover we can't. Hello. But by entering into relationship with things, it regulates our nervous system, and it makes us a part of something so much bigger than ourselves. We're harder to scare.
Yes, it introduces the awe back into life, AWE. And I think because there's so much light pollution, certainly in the UK, we stop looking up. And I often wonder, before the Industrial Revolution, what an incredible I'm not saying that life was easy in them, because of course it wasn't, but it must have been this incredible when the night fell, looking up and going, oh my God, I am this tiny little speck of something amongst this incredible something else. And I think we've forgotten the awe of life. That's what has happened for me.
So we are reclaiming it, and it doesn't change the trajectory, but it helps us fasten our seatbelts, makes us harder to shake.
Yeah. So what would you say to somebody who is really suffering, and a lot of people are, from the whole concept of looking at the planet, feeling the changes, the conflict that's going on?
The external situation is one thing, but it's our internal processing of it has a huge effect on our response. And I understand that we have layers of baggage from the past that send us into one story or another. But we, with work, we can change some of those stories. And one of the stories that I find helpful, it's not a happy story, but it's a courageous story, is the story of the crumbling cliff. And this metaphor works particularly well for me because significant sections of California are crumbling into the sea. That's always been true. That's not a climate change thing. And, we thought we were on stable ground, but we're not. The cliff is crumbling. We don't know at what speed. At the bottom of the cliff is not an abyss. It's the tide line where things are very uncertain and life is very precarious, but people make a life at the tide line. So don't think that you're going to drop into the abyss and disappear. Think that life is going to be harder and you're going to need all your courage and all your compassion.
That's a wonderful thing to say. I love that, the fact that the cliff has always been crumbling, because it always has.
Yeah.
And
I mean, think of the 20th century with wars. Think of those atomic bombs, concentration camps. It's always, I mean, that was an immense scale, and percentage-wise, less people died in wars in the 20th century, we're told, than in previous centuries. It's always been happening, and we've been so sheltered. And the way we've been sheltered is by not attending to the non-human world, but treating it like a big box store, treating it like Amazon, and that can't continue. We're hitting hard limits.
I think where the conversations I've had with people, where the fear appears to be the most alive, is this concept: we have to change. And not many of us want to let go of how we're living because it's very comfortable. And that's something else that we have to look at and work with and adapt with. And I wondered what you had to say about that.
Thank you. Chapter 9, letting go. What I try to do, first of all, I admit that I'm never gonna go and homestead and try to live without modern conveniences until I have to. But I can make a game of what can I do to live more simply, to not need these global supply chains, to and just take it really small, but then be very proud of myself when I let something go, when I make do. Because I think I don't know how it is in the US, but the people who went through the Depression and the War of the 20th century had this great pride in making do and living simply. And we've lost that. We think we need more and more to be happy. And in reality, it actually feeds very well into the idea of reverence that we were talking about before, and awe. If you when I actually try to attend to the things in my daily life, I realize I've got 10 times more things in my daily life than I can actually attend to. I could live so much more simply with less comfort, it's true, but also less overhead in the brain. So to make letting go not deprivation, but a source of, yeah, I'm living in right relationship with the earth. I'm moving in that direction. I mean, I'm far from it.
That's that's the Buddhist view, isn't it? Right relationship. How do I form right relationship? And I love that. I love that, those words. What is right relationship with myself, with you, with where I live, with my cat, with my friends? This sort of sense of right relationship. And this is something I believe we all really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, and I noticed there's this mostly financial dread that people have. Watching inflation kick in for the first time in a long time. Um, and again, people have made a life in countries where the economy went to hell. And probably because of policies in the US and England, right? Um, so how can we make our happiness less dependent on those things? It,
Yeah.
and it's hardest for the young people because it's so hard to afford a place to live.
Same in the UK. It's disastrous
Mhm,
for them at the moment. And of
mhm.
course, we are the generation that we had it all.
So
So
here's a thing that
yes,
we can do. We can tell young people different stories. We can say, we had it good, you don't. How can I help? How can I make your life enjoyable in the limitations you have? And by the way, they are not failures, they're limitations. That's so important. There's so much despair among young people.
that's a wonderful, thank you so much for that. It's just a lovely thing because my children are middle-aged going through it, and so many children's are. And how do we talk to the kids about the world that's unfolding in front of them when they haven't had what we've had? This, and we did, I grew up in stability. I trusted the world, I trusted the planet, and I am going through a time of adapting and changing my relationship with that. Is there
Yeah,
any
I don't have the last word on how to support young people, but I do want us to recognize that they have it much harder than we do.
Yeah. Is there
Yeah.
anything that you'd like to finally say, Terry, about your book or about the work that you do?
I Two things. One is don't be afraid of your grief. Grief is as taboo as death, and I find that I've learned to have this relationship with grief where it comes and goes. It's it's not fun, but it connects me. It shows me what I value. It opens my heart if I let it. And it doesn't rule my life, It comes for a visit, and it's now that I know to let it in the first time, it doesn't need to bang down the door. So trust your grief, I guess I would say that. And the other thing is find what you're rooted in. So be rooted in something bigger than yourself. And I know that people have many different conceptions of the sacred, and atheists can be rooted in their love of the cosmos. Um, Everyone can be rooted in something, and let it be something big enough that disaster won't shake it. And then a third thing, share that with others, because there's a lot of scared or despairing people. around.
A wonderful place to end this. Thank you so much, Terry.